Ryan Giggs faces a possible retrial after the jury in his domestic violence case fails to reach any verdict. Throughout the 4-week trial, he denied charges of assault and coercive controlling behaviour towards his ex-partner, Kate Greville. The former footballer will find out next week if he's to face a new trial, also tonight.
I can tell you that we will certainly make sure that the arrangements for the handover will fit totally around her and whatever she wants.
An historic first, the Queen will swear in the new Prime Minister at Balmoral and not at Buckingham Palace. As floodwaters begin to recede in Pakistan, we witness the full extent of the damage to thousands of homes. Laughing gas or nitrous oxide, a warning to young people from doctors linking it to nerve damage.
Away the target will be off my back slightly, and I just have another chance to kind of claw my way back up there.
This is the ITV Evening News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. Ryan Giggs tonight faces a possible retrial after a jury failed to reach verdicts on the domestic abuse charges against him. The trial of the former Manchester United footballer lasted 4 weeks, hearing allegations of violent and coercive behaviour towards his ex-girlfriend, Kate Greville. He denied all the charges, including that on one occasion he lost control and headbutted her. Well, the jury deliberated for more than 20 hours, but after failing to agree on any verdict, was today discharged by the judge. There'll be a hearing next week to decide what happens now. From the court, Sangeeta Lal reports.
Arriving at court, no doubt hoping today would mark the end of this chapter in some way. But this trial is far from over. With no verdict reached, Ryan Giggs faces a potential retrial. It's a story that's dominated his life since November 2020, when his ex Kate Greville made claims against him, leading him to be charged with coercive controlling behaviour, causing her actual bodily harm, and of common assault against her younger sister Emma Greville. The trial has lasted 17 days for a jury to decide the truth. But after 22 hours and 59 minutes, the jury was sworn back in. The judge asked them, had they reached a verdict on any counts? They answered no. They were also asked if extra time would help them reach a verdict. They answered no. Mr Giggs has always denied the charges against him, and supporting his side, his former manager Sir Alex Ferguson told the court he'd never seen Mr Giggs lose his temper. Signed with Manchester United at 14 years old, his skills on the pitch were described as magical. Throughout this trial, though, it's his character off the pitch that's been questioned. The centre of the allegations revolve around one night in November 2020, when Miss Greville claims he headbutted her and elbowed her sister in the jaw. So controversial it meant stepping down from his post as Wales manager in June this year, a job he described as his dream. A dream that's over for now, until he's either able to clear his name or found guilty of the charges. The judge told the jury they must consider if this was a relationship that veered off the rails by an ex unable to accept his serial womanising, or was it a much darker, sinister one that involved a man exerting his power over an emotionally vulnerable woman. Well, now the court will meet again in a week's time where they'll discuss whether this goes to a retrial, and part of that discussion will be the public interest of a retrial. But after hearing evidence for 12 days and deliberating since last Tuesday, the judge thanked the jurors and discharged them. She then turned to Ryan Giggs, who was standing in the dock, and explained to him he's been released on bail, but then his head dropped as she also explained that if this does go to a retrial, it won't be until at least June next year, in a story that is far from over.
Right, Sangeeta in Manchester, thank you. Now, for the first time in her long reign, the Queen will not be at Buckingham Palace for the formal appointment of the new Prime Minister. It's been confirmed that instead, either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will go to Balmoral next Tuesday for the traditional audience with the Queen. The departure from tradition follows the Queen's recent mobility issues. Our royal editor, Chris Shipp, reports.
The Queen has had 14 Prime Ministers. They began with Winston Churchill in 1952 and ever since then.
His successor was summoned to the palace by the Queen.
When there has been a change in Downing Street, the new Prime Minister has been summoned to Buckingham Palace and invited by the monarch to form a new government. But this time, when Boris Johnson hands over next week, it will be different. Different because the Queen is no longer able to travel to London. She's on her annual summer break at Balmoral, so the outgoing and incoming Prime Ministers will need to travel 500 miles north to see her.
I don't talk about my conversations with the Queen, no Prime Minister ever does, but I can tell you that we will certainly make sure that the arrangements for the handover will fit totally around her and whatever she wants.
After seeing Prime Minister Johnson for the final time, it will be either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak who will be asked to enter the drawing room next and become the Queen's 15th Prime Minister. Buckingham Palace won't say why the 96-year-old monarch can no longer travel to London, beyond creating some certainty for the PM's travel plans. But her mobility issues have forced her to miss several engagements in recent months, including in May when she asked Prince Charles to represent her at the state opening of Parliament. Today's announcement might be a change of plan, but it's not the ordeal Prime Ministers of previous monarchs have endured.
Asquith had to go and see the King, Edward VII, in Biarritz, and it took 4 days out of his life, going to Paris, changing trains, going down there, arriving late at night, seeing the King the next morning, having lunch and dinner with him, seeing the following day, and then returning to London.
The appointment of her Prime Minister is the personal prerogative of the sovereign, and she can do it wherever she needs to.
As you can see, Chris is outside Buckingham Palace for us this evening. So, Chris, what can we read into today's statement from the Palace?
Well, Lucrezia, I think, questions about the Queen's health were always going to surface as soon as Buckingham Palace confirmed, as it did this morning, that this meeting with her new Prime Minister, inviting him or her to form a new government, was moving from Buckingham Palace to Balmoral. And when we asked the reasons why, the answer from Buckingham Palace was, we don't give a running commentary on the Queen's health. They never do. That said, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised if the Queen was cancelling engagements because she couldn't travel from Windsor Castle to central London in the past few months. How did anyone expect her to go from Balmoral to Aberdeen Airport, fly to an RAF base, then drive here to Buckingham Palace and do everything in reverse within the space of 24 hours? I spoke to a couple of insiders today. They tell me the Queen remains as sharp as a tack, but obviously at 96 is having issues with moving around. And of course, Lucrezia, if you're the head of state and you can move a meeting like this, then why wouldn't you?
All right, Chris, thank you. Well, there are just a few days now before the outcome of the lengthy Tory leadership battle to decide on Boris Johnson's successor. Tonight, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are in London for the final hustings with party members before Friday's voting deadline. Our deputy political editor, Anushka Stana, joins us from there. And Anushka, the final debate, then that's it for the leadership contest.
That is right. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss soon to walk out here on stage at Wembley Arena in front of 6,000 Tory members. They have travelled all over the country. This is the 12th formal hustings. And then, as you say, Tory members have until Friday at 5 to get their votes in. We will know who the winner is on Monday and they will take the role on Tuesday. Now, it is predicted to be Liz Truss, but whoever it is, the first thing they are going to have to do is tackle this terrible energy crisis that people are facing. I've been travelling around the country and the stories I've heard are unimaginable, heartbreaking, and not just at the extreme, on every corner. I met pensioners who are worried about surviving the winter. I met Nadia in Leicester who has lung cancer and won't put her heating on at all this winter. She sits in the dark at home to save money. I met Stephen who built his own pub in Cleckheaton in Yorkshire 32 years ago and now will have to close it because the bills have gone from £10,000 to £47,000 a year. They all want answers. They don't think they can wait a week, but they're going to have to. This will be top of the in tray for the new Prime Minister.
OK, Anushka, thank you. Well, from two would-be leaders to another who, towards the end of the last century, helped change the course of history. Tributes have poured in from around the world for the former Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev, whose death was announced last night. He's been saluted for his part in bringing about a peaceful end to the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, though there are many who take a very different view of his legacy. Our correspondent Robert Moore reports.
In Moscow today, there has been a muted response to the death of the man who oversaw the collapse of the Soviet Union. At Mikhail Gorbachev's foundation, they marked his passing with a simple gesture. The only official televised response came from the Kremlin spokesman, who said Gorbachev had misjudged the West. There was no romantic age, Dmitry Peskov told Russians. The bloodlust of our opponents has shown itself. But Gorbachev's extraordinary leadership through the tumult of the collapse of the USSR changed Russia, Europe and the world. It brought an end to the Cold War. It witnessed signature arms control agreements and the peaceful unification of Germany. Much of this occurred because in Mikhail Gorbachev, the Kremlin had a new kind of leader, a young, bold reformer with a vision of an open and more liberal Russia. It was on an early visit to Britain that Margaret Thatcher famously declared that he was a Soviet politician that she could do business with.
Gorbachev was utterly different. He was almost like a Western politician. He was relaxed, he was amusing, but he was also somebody who had very firm views. He knew exactly what he was trying to achieve.
Gorbachev was indeed different, unafraid to mix with ordinary people. Not just in Russia, but on a visit to Washington. Gorbachev! He famously stopped his limousine and went out to shake hands, stunning American officials and passers-by.
The guy is a PR genius.
Gorbachev was forced to resign after a failed coup by hardliners that saw him return to Moscow a broken man. The Yeltsin era witnessed political liberalism but economic chaos and the rise of the oligarchs. And that in turn paved the way for Vladimir Putin, who appears committed to unraveling Gorbachev's reforms and to reconstructing a Russian empire. But it does not change Gorbachev's precious legacy.
He saw the way the world had to go. He didn't succeed personally in getting Russia to the place he wanted to be, but he will always be a beacon for liberty and freedom and for someone who saw that social change had to happen in a country that had been oppressed for too long.
One famous ad for a pizza company captured the ambivalence that Russians felt towards Gorbachev until the very end.
Это из-за него у нас политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас свобода.
Полный хаос.
Перспектив.
For all the conflicting views of his life, Gorbachev, who died at 91, will be at the forefront of the story of the 20th century.
Well, Robert, you reported firsthand on the final years of Gorbachev's rule and you watched how his legacy has played out. What is your assessment of his achievements?
I think one of the reasons that any assessment is so complicated is that on one level, his legacy is one of failure. Just look now at Russia being in the grip of severe political repression, war, and diplomatic isolation. But on another level, it was, if you like, kind of a magnificent failure. Those were stunningly refreshing years in the late 1980s when Gorbachev ruled in those final days of the Soviet Union. There was suddenly bursting into the open freedom of expression. Dissidents were being released. There was a sense of openness, and he was prepared to shine a light, a harsh light, on the corruption and dysfunction at the very heart of the Soviet system. There is, as well, immense sorrow, I think, in the timing of Gorbachev's death. His mother was Ukrainian, his father was Russian, and now, of course, Russia engaged in this catastrophic war in Ukraine, doing so much to overshadow what at the time were those kind of intoxicating and hopeful days of his reformist agenda.
Robert, in Washington, thank you. Here, millions of households are dreading the prospect of soaring energy bills, but the cost of living crisis is now hitting harder in the weekly food shop too. Latest figures show the price of food is continuing to rise. The inflation rate of food in shops and supermarkets rose from 7% in July to 9.3% in August. That is the highest it's been since 2008. Well, Peter Smith reports now on the rising cost of the weekly food shop.
It's the familiar conversation for many at the shops now.
I need to check the price on that. $2.49.
Oh, $1.49.
Oh, yes, yeah, well done.
Cutting back, saving money wherever possible.
It's my favourite.
This one's cheaper though. Would you eat that?
Just get that.
Or...
Get that, yeah.
Serena and her son Alex are trying, but it's still barely enough.
Every time I'm spending more, I'm kind of going into more debt. So, yeah, it's just a constant stress.
The last month has been particularly bad. UK shops just saw their highest jump in prices since records began.
I use food banks quite a lot, so, you know, try and use tin foods where I can, just to kind of make up those days where I just haven't got enough.
Alex's father passed away and Serena is a single parent.
So
yeah, we've got like hardly any snacks.
They were just getting by. Now it's breaking point.
He knows, you know, that things are really tight. It's just constantly like, no, mum's got no money, mum's got no money.
How are you going to keep your head above water?
It's a good question. I've got no idea. Every day is just a struggle.
Across the country, it's the same. Each trip to the shop is getting worse and worse for those who can least afford it. This right here illustrates how bad things already are. A pretty standard shop of milk, flour, butter and white bread. 1 year ago, £7. Today, it's almost £12. Desperation is already here. This food bank in the Welsh town of Cwmbran was broken into last night, but it's what they took and what they didn't that is a sign of the times.
When we came in, it was still there. So they didn't come in for the money, they just came for the food.
Food banks are seeing a surge in people asking for help, but here they're surprised to see who is coming in nowadays.
We get teachers, we get support staff from hospitals coming here. So yeah, a lot of working people.
The UK government promises a package of help is coming when the new Prime Minister takes office, but those already on the brink say they cannot afford to wait. Peter Smith, ITV News.
There is plenty more to come on the ITV Evening News, including we're in Pakistan where the true scale of the devastating floods is being uncovered. The cost of living crisis is hitting our care homes too, and most don't think they can stretch much further. And will new rules manage to control an avian flu outbreak ahead of next shooting season? Join us, those stories and much more in just a few minutes. Welcome back. The monsoon rains may have stopped with the floodwaters that swamped large parts of Pakistan starting at last to recede, but only now is the full extent of the devastation becoming clear. And with the devastation comes the very real fear that the deadly waterborne diseases could spread among the tens of thousands of people whose homes and communities have been ruined. Well, the area in blue shows the parts of Pakistan affected by the floods, around a third of the country. Our international affairs editor Raghi Omar has been to the city of Nowshera and sent us this report.
Slowly, a few people in Nowshera are venturing to return to their homes, to pick through the sludge and debris of their dwellings, smashed and broken by Pakistan's catastrophic floodwaters. Everyone, no matter how young, are having to still wade through the dirty water to recover what they can. Safiyullah and his recently married younger brother emerge, waist high, from the alleyway leading to their family home. A small plastic bag holding what they could retrieve.
What happened to your house? We saw you coming out.
Sir, the house is completely in the water. Minimum 8 to 9 feet level inside our houses and rooms.
This is a land swallowed by floods. As far as the eye can see, huge swathes of Pakistan remain submerged. Relief agencies say nearly 700,000 homes have been damaged.
Even though the water has begun to recede, it's not just houses on either side of the road that have been completely destroyed. Property and fields kilometers in that direction and in that direction have been totally destroyed. And standing here, it's hard to see how anyone will be able to return to the shelter of their homes anytime soon.
These buildings and corridors should be filled with students learning engineering and technical skills. Instead, they are now makeshift refugee camps filled with families whose homes will somehow have to be rebuilt. With so many cut off from the means to sustain themselves, local charities and neighbouring towns and communities are coming to Naushara's aid. This makeshift feeding centre on the side of the main road sprung up as we were there, organised by a local professor and some of his students.
Is there any food coming from the government?
No. This is our. This is local. I have a group of youngest people.
Okay.
I have a students of my college, all students.
So you got together and brought the food here for people?
Yeah.
Pakistan has the 5th largest population in the world, and the government says 1/3 of this nation remains underwater, and the monsoon season is not over yet.
Well, Lucrezia, I'm back in the seat of government in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad. And today, the Prime Minister and other government leaders have been visiting other flood affected areas, including the Swat Valley, which is about another 3 hours north of where I was in Nowshera. Now, the Pakistani government is also appealing to Pakistanis abroad to try and come to this country's aid. And of course, one of the largest expatriate Pakistani or Pakistani origin communities is, of course, in the United Kingdom. And they're also appealing to international agencies. And the one thing on everyone's lips is that whilst the waters are receding, we are not completely out of the monsoon season yet, and fears that another deluge could happen, and hopefully it won't.
Maggie in Islamabad in Pakistan, thank you. Well, here family, friends, schoolmates and well-wishers are taking part in a church service and silent vigil tonight in memory of murdered 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Our reporter Ellie Pitt is there in Liverpool for us. Ellie, clearly an emotional event, and not just for those who knew Olivia, but for everyone in the city who's been shocked by what happened.
Yes, and you sense that from the number of people who've come out tonight. Many of them are just leaving the church now, around 200, including Olivia Pratt-Corbell's family and other young children attended the service tonight, because this has been the first time really that they've been able to come together, this community, to grieve collectively. 9-year-old Olivia went to the primary school just next door to St Margaret Mary's Church here. She was shot in her own home last week and died in hospital afterwards. The vigil started at 6 o'clock and included a short service of prayers and readings, as well as a book of condolence to be signed. The bishop who took the service spoke earlier of Olivia's family's grief.
I should imagine they're in bits, and I should imagine that they don't know what to say or how to respond, so it's trauma. Let them see visible support. It's one thing to send messages and emails and things, it's another thing to actually see people.
2 men have been arrested in connection with Olivia's death on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. They have been bailed but remain under investigation, and Merseyside Police today reissued their appeal for any help in this investigation.
Ellie, thank you. The toddler has died after being hit on the head by a hailstone during a violent storm in northeastern Spain. Around 50 other people were injured in the freak 10-minute storm that hit the region of Catalonia last night. It also destroyed houses, cut off power and smashed windows. New guidelines were issued today to try to control the outbreak of avian flu among Britain's wild bird population. Officials say the disease has spread from poultry farms to some of Britain's seabird colonies. But conservationists now fear thousands of game birds, specially reared for the forthcoming shooting season, could spread the disease further. Well, Rupert Evelyn's report contains images of dead birds.
Across the country, tens of millions of pheasants and partridges have been released into the wild, growing and feeding together in preparation for the shooting season. But should they be? Given that avian flu is still prevalent, is this the time to be introducing so many birds into the environment? The RSPB think not, and want the releasing of game birds to stop.
If they were to transfer bird flu into terrestrial bird populations, into woodland birds, into farmland birds, it would take something that is already a crisis for our seabirds and turn it into a full-blown catastrophe for our wild bird populations across the country.
Avian flu has and continues to cause devastation amongst wild bird populations. The scenes from the Farne Islands recently are a stark reminder that this strain of the flu is tearing through wild bird colonies. But does it follow that the same will happen with game birds? They can transmit the disease, but the industry argue the evidence isn't there to force them to stop what they're doing.
Once you look at the scientific evidence, look at the history of what's happened in the past, the fact that there are no known cases of game birds, released game birds spreading infection in the countryside, the risk is so small that it is hugely outweighed by the much greater risk to the countryside of shooting not happening.
The government believe the threat of game birds spreading the flu are low, but they're taking no chances and say they're currently updating their risk assessment. So far, avian flu hasn't taken hold in the countryside in quite the same way that we've seen at the coast, but it could. And the fear is that with millions of game birds congregating around feeders like this, they might prove to be a vector for spreading the disease. The test will be what happens in the coming months. The hope on all sides is that the flu does not penetrate here. Rupert Elin, ITV News, Wiltshire.
You're watching the ITV Evening News. Here's what's still ahead before Emmerdale. A look at the serious side effects of nitrous oxide. Why David Beckham's latest advertising gig has caused upsets. How Emma Raducanu is turning a negative into a positive. Why this 7-year-old is breaking records at the same time as playing them.
And I've come to this vineyard to find out what impact the hot, dry summer we had will mean for British wine production. Plus, I will have the full national forecast coming up shortly.
But first, the toll being taken by the cost of living crisis is perhaps felt particularly hard by those least able to fend for themselves. The care homes that look after thousands of vulnerable residents are tonight telling us they are finding it increasingly difficult to cope with the rising cost of essentials. Almost all managers say the cost of running their care homes has increased. Just over 80% are either worried or certain they can't keep up with rising prices of energy, food and staffing. And a big majority say residents may have to pay more as a result. When it comes to something, when heartbroken chefs at care homes tell us they are even cutting corners at mealtimes. Our UK editor Paul Brand has more.
As the cost of living rises, there are few places more costly to live than in here. Providing quality care requires a quantity of cash much larger than living in your own home. And everywhere you look at Normanby House in Scarborough, the cost of caring is going up. This company crunched their accounts for us across their 4 homes. Pre- and post-COVID costs are incomparable, not least of all the soaring price of energy. In 2019, they paid £157,000 to fuel their homes. Even before October's rise, this year it'll be £418,000, a 165% increase.
It's not like when we're at home, we can turn our heating down a degree or two just to save that bit of money. Here we can't do that because obviously the change in temperature will be felt really severely by the residents. If we have a light off, then it's a trip hazard. They could fall and have an accident.
I bet these washers and dryers are never off, are they?
Oh, they're on constantly, yeah, you know, because, again, you can't sort of limit the number of times you put a wash on.
Nor the number of calories consumed here. In the kitchen, the fridges are full of ever pricier food. In 2019, it cost the company £161,000 to feed the residents. Now it's £211,000, a rise of 31%.
To use an example, is like butter. Started off at like £40 a case, and now it's got up to something like 72. It's hard because you want to give the best to the residents. It upsets you when you do something and you think, oh, am I doing the right thing for them? And am I giving them the best I can?
Staff here don't just worry about caring for others, but for themselves. Phil's waiting for a kidney transplant.
Hey, Tony, you all right?
His employer has tried to increase salaries. In 2019, they spent £3 million on staff in total. Now it's £4.7 million, a rise of 60%. But each carer's pay is still falling behind prices.
Although it's a very rewarding and fulfilling job, that the financial aspects of it are quite tough, and it is quite scary.
Have you thought about having to leave the industry if it comes to it?
Fortunately, yeah, I would think long and hard about having to leave it and going back to working at a supermarket. It's not something I want to give up, because when you look after people 24/7, you get attached.
But staff are increasingly having to break that attachment, leaving the management reliant on agency carers. In 2019, they spent £62,000 on them. This year, it'll be £314,000, a rise of 406%.
I've been in the sector now just over 33 years, and actually it's the toughest I've known. But the problem is, when is a crisis a crisis? We in social care have been saying for a long time there is a problem, but no one listens. Now we're in a real difficult area. The government's got so many challenges on its hands. I fear it falls on deaf ears still until it's too late.
Hello.
And the cost of care isn't just going up for homes, but for those who live in them. 96-year-old Les and granddaughter Lauren must find up to 15% more in fees. Selling his house won't be enough for long.
He's paying £975 a week. I've been reassured that he won't be thrown out on the streets, but where's the money going to come from?
Are you worried about all these costs going up, Les?
I don't. Reason not, because I don't know. It seems a hell of a lot of money.
Seems a hell of a lot of money.
What does your granddad mean to you?
He's my absolute world. He brought him and my gran, as I said, they brought me up. They gave up everything for us. And I do live with the guilt because I couldn't keep him at home, in his own home.
Les would face rising prices there too. But tonight, on top of looking after their residents, more than ever, homes are having to care about costs as well.
Well, Paul, you reported extensively on the COVID crisis in care homes. They're now facing a cost of living crisis. How will they cope?
With difficulty, I think, Lucrezia, because they were already facing a funding and staffing crisis before this cost of living crisis. There are some things, though, that care homes say would really, really help them. For example, extending the energy price cap to care homes. They say it doesn't make any sense that if you're sitting at home this evening receiving care in your own home, then you benefit from the energy price cap. But if you're sitting in a care home, it doesn't apply to you. And so they've written to the Health Secretary this week and said, can he sort out that particular anomaly? There hasn't been a huge response from the government. Of course, we are still pending a new Prime Minister. Tonight, the Department of Health and Social Care told us, though, that there's little they can do about global energy prices. What they have done is put in money and measures to help care homes through this particular difficulty. Care homes, though, can't afford to be cold this winter, and right now, neither do they know how they're going to afford to stay warm either.
All right, Paul, thank you. Well, you can go to our website to read more from Paul on how care homes are trying to cope with rising prices. Let's get an update on what is making the news tonight. Ryan Giggs faces a possible retrial after the jury in his domestic violence case failed to reach any verdict. The ex-footballer denies charges of assault and coercive control. In an historic first, the Queen will swear in the new Prime Minister next week at Balmoral and not at Buckingham Palace. And in Pakistan, receding floodwaters are exposing the extent of the damage that has affected nearly 1 million homes across the country. Doctors are warning that the misuse of a gas common in the catering industry as a recreational drug is reaching epidemic proportions. They say nitrous oxide, known as laughing gas, can cause serious nerve damage and even paralysis. Martin Stew reports.
Giant cans of nitrous oxide confiscated at the Notting Hill Carnival. Known as NOS, hippie crack or laughing gas, it's inhaled from balloons to give the user a head rush and high. But despite its jovial name, doctors warn this drug isn't just harmless fun.
excessive use is destructive. It's destructive for a 19-year-old.
Neurologist Dr. Nikos Evangelou says he and his colleagues in the Midlands have seen a string of paralysed teenagers in the last few months alone.
Having a balloon probably is not dangerous. Having 2 balloons is not dangerous. But what we see is that people end up using it all the time.
Kerry Ann was a regular user in her teens and early 20s. She started to lose sensation in her limbs after inhaling up to 600 balloons a week.
It was addictive trying to chase a high. It was addictive just naturally just doing them.
Now, despite not having used the drug for 2 years, she needs a wheelchair to travel any distance.
They done an MRI scan and found out that I have a disc bulge and it's pushing on my nerves.
And that was caused, was it, by laughing gas?
Yeah.
It is legal to sell nitrous oxide as a catering supply. It's used for whipping cream, but the size of the canisters is increasing. This one I bought today off a guy with only his mobile phone number on the internet is 175 times larger than those small silver canisters.
That's a concern because you have a huge amount more nitrous oxide at your disposal. And as a result of that, the side effects and the risks that nitrous oxide carries are amplified.
Doctors believe prolonged use can deactivate vitamin B12 in the body, putting the user at risk of neurological problems. A lesson Kerry Ann has learnt too late.
It's not worth it. I know people are still going to see this and think, oh, this can't happen to me or it won't happen to me, I'm still going to use it. But if you are going to use it, just educate yourself.
Martin Stew, ITV News.
Rail workers will stage another set of strikes in September as the dispute over pay and conditions continues. Mass walkouts over the summer have brought travel misery for many passengers, but there is still no resolution. The strikes are scheduled to start on the 15th of September. And meanwhile, thousands of postal workers went on strike for the second time today, further delaying deliveries for customers. Staff from the Royal Mail will also take further action next month, calling for higher wages. David Beckham came under fire today for making a promotional video about Qatar, the Middle East desert state, which is hosting this year's World Cup. The video has caused controversy because it promotes Qatar for its lifestyle, despite there being questions over its human rights record. Vincent McAviney has more.
He's one of the wealthiest footballers ever, the former England captain, self-declared feminist and UNICEF ambassador promoting rights and equality around the world. But David Beckham's latest spokesman role is raising concerns.
For Qatar to host this World Cup in 2022 is very special.
In a slickly shot, half-hour promotional film, Beckham, who's reportedly been paid tens of millions by Qatar, sings the country's praises.
Qatar really is an incredible place to spend a few days on a stopover.
When it comes to human rights, though, the Gulf state's record is troubling. It's illegal to be gay, and women still need permission to study and marry. The country's preparations for this autumn's World Cup have also been heavily criticised. On top of accusations of modern slavery, it's alleged over 6,000 workers, largely from Asia, have died during the construction of stadiums due to the poor safety standards and conditions.
David Beckham has reportedly been paid £150 million to promote Qatar, but frankly, given all the news that's coming out about the human rights situation in Qatar, it really is quite galling. Thousands of workers haven't been paid on these construction sites. You know, frankly, it seems incredibly naive and blind for him to be putting out that kind of video when things are so bad over there.
Beckham was also a prominent member of England's bid team to host the World Cup in this era. After it was awarded instead to Russia and Qatar, Beckham said in a 2011 interview he suspected there was corruption behind the scenes at FIFA, that there is obviously something wrong, which had left him feeling sick. But today, Beckham's representatives declined to comment on his role. He's expected to be paraded heavily by the Qataris at the tournament, but the questions around the human cost of their spectacle are unlikely to go away. Vincent McAviney, ITV News.
Well, to tennis now. And Emma Raducanu admitted today that her miserable return to the US Open hurt a bit, so that could be an understatement. Her defence of the title she won last year lasted little more than 100 minutes as she was bundled out in straight sets in her first round match. It was a harsh awakening from last year's dream triumph at Flushing Meadows, as Sejal Carrier reports.
But 12 months on,
This was a tricky first round encounter with Elise Cornet. Raducanu then called for a medical break, receiving treatment for blisters. But she faced the same challenges in the second set. And in just over 100 minutes, it was all over. A far cry from last year, when her win was hailed as the greatest British triumph in women's tennis for decades.
US Open Women's Champion, Emma Raducanu.
This time, it was a crestfallen Raducanu who appeared at the post-match press conference.
Obviously really disappointing, but also, I mean, in a way happy because it's a clean slate. You know, I'm going to drop down the rankings, climb my way back up. And yeah, I mean, I think in a way the target will be off my back slightly.
Now she's got this out the way, the first round defeat, she can start building on the tour again. You know, small steps. A ranking of, 80 in the world for a 19-year-old, that's actually not too bad.
There is still more to come.
I want to be like a big, famous DJ.
The little DJ with big ambitions.
And just what impact has the extreme summer had on British vineyards? I'll have more on that next, plus your full national forecast.
Join me and Alex in just a few moments. Hello again. The drought this summer has, as we know, played havoc with the crops on many British farms. But what's been the impact on one crop in particular, Britain's wine-producing vineyards? Well, Alex has been finding out in Hampshire. Alex, tell us more.
Yes, that's right, Lucrezia. It certainly has been a record-breaking summer in so many ways and unforgettable for many. And it certainly has been quite harsh on farming and agriculture. But I am at Hattingley Valley Vineyard in Hampshire, which is on some fairly stunning grounds. Actually, 10 acres with 42,000 vines, which produce around 20,000 bottles of wine. And as you can imagine, the extreme weather has been, well, pretty harsh on them in some ways. And they are certainly worried about the future of winemaking here in Britain if our summers are going to be a lot drier than what they have been. Here's what they had to say a bit earlier.
The uncertainty really is, it's a really big challenge because we just don't know from year to year what it's going to be. And the extremes of weather seem to be getting more. We will have to think very hard about what we do with the vineyard, and at the moment everything looks great, but we know that this is 1 year out of the next 20, 30, 40.
Well, they'll certainly be hoping for a spot of rain in the coming days, and I think wishes are going to be granted. We're going to see more unsettled weather moving in towards this weekend, which is the start of September. So more autumnal conditions look like they are on the way. Let's take a look at those details right now.
The warm weather continues. So why not squeeze the most out of the day? Heinz Tomato Ketchup sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, looking at the rest of this week, it's going to be dry for now with high pressure not too far away. But as I say, we're expecting things to turn unsettled as we creep towards this weekend, really from Friday onwards. But if we take a look at the pressure pattern setup as we head through the next couple of days, you can see it's high pressure, which is the name of the game at the moment. That does keep weather fronts at bay for the time being. But you'll notice that area of low pressure just sneaking into the south by the time we get to Friday. Certainly a sign of things to come. But as for this evening and overnight, it's going to be relatively quiet with variable amounts of cloud cover. Certainly some lengthy clear breaks in places, and this is where rurally we'll probably see our nighttime temperatures slipping into single figures, but in towns and cities certainly holding up in double digits. So as we start tomorrow, it's going to be much like it was this morning, bright in many places with some welcome warm spells of sunshine as we head through the daytime. Chance of 1 or 2 scattered showers, but I think the emphasis really on a dry day for many of us through the course of of Thursday, with a top temperature similar to today of around 24, maybe 25 degrees Celsius in the south, but certainly a little bit fresher as we head further north. Heading into Friday, well, that's when we start to see things breaking down, low pressure arriving from the south. That will feed up some outbreaks of rain across southern parts and also out towards some western areas as we head through the daytime. And then as we head into the weekend, if we take a look at the outlook, it does go downhill. Low pressure starts to move in from the northwest. The winds pick up across parts of Scotland, maybe touching gale force, with outbreaks of fairly heavy rain in many places.
Heinz Tomato Ketchup sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, that's the way it is looking this evening. Quiet for now, but as I say, prepare for a bit of rain as we head towards this coming weekend. So if you've got outdoor plans, maybe have a bit of a rain check.
All right, Alex in Hampshire, thank you. And finally, Archie Norbury from North Essex is a phenomenon, a DJing phenomenon. He's played to crowds of 20,000 and wants to do Glastonbury and to have a bunch of cars and a mansion. So far, so normal, you might say. But did I mention he's just 7 years old and officially the youngest ever DJ? Ian Woods reports.
He'll have to wait another decade before bouncers will let him into a club as a customer. But DJ Archie is already on the VIP list. He became a world record holder after playing a solo hour-long set when he was just 4 and has now played to crowds of 20,000 at festivals.
They normally like wave at me and then like they go woo and like shout DJ Archie.
His dad John dabbled with decks himself. Archie learned by watching him as a toddler.
He played at a festival and I warmed up for him. I played garage for an hour and then he came on and absolutely smashed me to pieces.
It was very hard to do for first, but then I just got into it. Now I'm just nearly better than him.
Nearly better than him?
Yeah, nearly better than him.
I thought you'd be better than him by now.
Teeny bit. He's a little tiny bit better. Like now I just like crack on with it and then just dance with the crowd and like jump up and down like woo and then party.
Drum and bass is DJ Archie's speciality. He's getting used to the spotlight, but has his sights set even higher.
I want to be like a big famous DJ.
But you're already you're a little famous DJ at the moment.
Yeah, a little famous.
And what's your ultimate ambition, do you think?
To do a festival at Glastonbury and like have a lot of crowd in there. My goal is to like have a bunch of cars and like a mansion.
Archie may already be big on the club scene. When he gets taller, he won't need that step up, so the audience can see who's dropping the beats. Ian Woods, ITV News.
Oh, Archie, we'll see you at Glastonbury soon. But that is it for now. Tom will be here with news at 10, which is on later than usual at 10:30. But from everyone on the evening news team, bye-bye. Have a great evening.